In today's video, we're going to work on with the line which turned into a wave last week. And here we have a wave. The thing I just want to talk a little bit about before we go on to work with the line, the wave, is that you've perhaps noticed what your line is like. There's maybe a quality to your line when you're doing these form drawing exercises. Perhaps your line is tight and straight without much rounding in it. Perhaps it's difficult for you to round your line to get kind of nice looking curves. Perhaps it's easier for you to just do the straight bit, the binding bit. Or perhaps your line is very loose and lively. Perhaps it's a little bit tending towards the chaotic. It's maybe difficult for you to keep a hold of your kind of line. Or maybe your line is quite flattish. Perhaps it's quite an effort for you to actually create the shapes. It could also be that your line is very rounded, so it almost becomes a tangle. I'll give you an example of all of these. They're actually illustrated also in the book. And the reason that I've kind of given 4 different examples is because in the book there is a talk of 4 different temperaments, and the first is the Choleric Temperament. And if you have a very pronounced choleric temperament, then perhaps you'll draw a line that often looks something like this. So as you can see, it's quite straight, but it also draws in energy straight and then draws in energy and explodes out in straight and draws in energy and explodes out. So that's sort of the choleric temperament, where you're very sort of energetic and explosive almost. And then there's the Sanguine Temperament, which in the book is illustrated with the, as I mentioned before, a more sort of lively line. It doesn't actually look quite like this, but this is a little bit what it's like. And as you can see, my lines tend to get a little bit sort of straight. But, you know, a sanguine personality is someone who's quite lively, quite outward-going. Actually, this perhaps is not the best illustration. In the book, it's sort of also illustrated with, you know, a line going like this. So you have sort of great depths, and then it's coming up, rising and rising even further up, and then going down and coming back down again. So that's a sort of sanguine personality. As you can see, this is sort of tending towards almost the chaotic. You know, you're finding it difficult to really hold on to things because you're so lively and loose. And then the book shows the melancholic temperament as more of like basically a line like this. So it's almost flat. And this is where I was saying, if you're a melancholic who finding life is hard and it's difficult and there's always trouble, and you know it's difficult to find, that is maybe what your line would tend to look like. Obviously all of these lines are exaggerated, but it's just to give you an idea. And then the last one, where you might be very rounded, is shown in the book looking something like this. But where you're actually tending towards, in the end, becoming, you know, your rounded forms are actually overlapping at the end. and that's the phlegmatic temperament, where you are, as a phlegmatic person, you're very much not really bothered. It's okay, but at the same time, you're also the type of person who really finds their own company quite enough. And that's that's kind of illustrated almost here, where the form is beginning to overlap. You're having more and more tendency inward, so it's enclosing on itself more and more in this section here. So no matter whether you're basically a choleric, a sanguine, a melancholic, or a phlegmatic, when we're doing the form drawing, we should try and aim to create a harmonious line. And the harmonious line here is, what I mean by that is the harmonious wave. So this is what a harmonious wave looks like. And you should really try and work with this. Get a nice rounded top, a nice rounded valley, rounded top, rounded valley, rounded hilltop, rounded valley, and a rounded top. And a harmonious wave obviously doesn't have wave tops that differ in height, and it has valleys that are also the same height. So if you're drawing a band across, and you can do that if you feel the need, then you know the tops and the bottoms are roughly at the same height. Now, when you are talking about a harmonious wave, and we've created our harmonious wave, it really calls for, as Kitsley says in the book, a complementary second rhythm, where we're running back the way. So here we're creating a second rhythm. So I'll perhaps just illustrate that with the crayon. So the first wave, I'll need to put my hand here so I can see where I'm drawing with the blue crayon. Right, so that's the first wave. I'm just drawing it up so that you can see it more clearly. So that's our first wave, and then our complementary second wave runs contrary to it and goes back the way. So now we're into a kind of territory that we know from previous exercises as well, where the next step is to have a wave, still a harmonious wave, but then we're coming back the way in a loop. So here we're looping, and although we're looping back, Kitsley emphasizes that it's still important to know that actually the band, which is a two-stranded ribbon, still consists of two rhythms. It's not one rhythm, it's two separate rhythms that's going on here, and then coming back the way. This can be a very nice and relaxing exercise to do, just literally running in your band. And if your band doesn't look harmonious, if it doesn't look absolutely perfect, then it's fine to adjust it as you're going. But that can be difficult. I'm just going to warn you now, because if you, for instance, have a tendency to maybe when you start doing it, you maybe have a bigger line and then a smaller, and it's maybe difficult to get things to be really harmonious, then perhaps your ribbon looks something like this. And then what you want to do is then go over your ribbon and try and correct it. But you'll find, this is my experience when I see people do this initially, that actually they follow the same line. We're kind of conditioned to follow the line that's already there, which is why it can be difficult initially. You have to really work with your own internal forces to correct. So if you want to correct a line which is not particularly harmonious, then you have to really, really make an effort in order to really try and move things into their right place. And that can take a lot of practice. But you can get there if you try. As you can see, now suddenly it becomes quite difficult, because which line was it? That was the correct one. So maybe the best thing to do if your line looks not very harmonious from the start is to simply start again. Just try and create the first wave so it looks harmonious, and work with that. And even when you have a first wave that you feel is harmonious, go back over that wave. Simply go back over it so that you get the feel of, this is what it would feel like being harmonious going back the way. So very similar to some of the earlier exercises that we've done as well, where we're working with creating the same line, running contra to the first line, but going from the opposite direction. So I think that this is probably enough for this week, and I'll be back next week. We'll work on with the wave, and I'll see you then.